Hello and welcome to LB Loxley's Wildlife. Now, badgers are very much the topic of conversation at the moment, with the Cull having started in Somerset this week. And with that in mind, I would like to welcome into the studio Vanessa Mason.
Morning, LB.
From the Somerset Badger Group. No, Adrian?
No, Adrian, I'm afraid, is very busy and has had to go down to Hastings.
Well, it's okay. Busy people, busy lives.
People, yeah.
Busy lives. Vanessa, perhaps we could start with, could you explain why you feel that the Cull is not the answer?
Okay. Well, first of all, it's not science-led. A 10-year, £50 million badger culling trial took place, and the conclusions from that trial were that it would not work. And in fact, the government's own estimates of what a badger cull, not necessarily these culling trials, but what a badger cull would contribute to the control of bovine TB, is that it would reduce the new incidence, not the current TB problem, but new incidence of TB by 16% after 9 years. Now, to me, that is a really ridiculous return.
Yeah.
It's also likely to make things worse. Mm-hmm. Culling badgers disrupts the social behaviour and the structure of badger groups. They then end up ranging much more widely with the potential increased risk of spreading bovine TB.
Yeah.
It's likely to be inhumane. Many very, very healthy badgers are going to get shot, maybe potentially are being shot this week.
Yes.
A very, very low percentage of badgers actually have TB, and an even fewer percentage of badgers actually are infectious.
Yeah.
So, the likelihood of killing over 5,000 badgers in these two culling trials this year is a travesty for farmers and their cattle, because it's not going to help them, and it's a travesty for badgers and wildlife in general. Mm. There is a major growing concern about the cull.
Yes.
The government e-petition that was set up last year has over 281,000 people who signed it. It's the most successful e-petition ever. The government have ignored those people. A number of very, very large conservation organisations have publicly stated that they are against the cull and it will not work. And they have between them over 4 million members. And in my view, this government should be putting its resources and money into really helping the farmers and going down the route of progressing cattle vaccination, and in the meantime using other measures like badger vaccination and improved testing regime.
Yes.
And improved biosecurity to try and help solve the problem.
I mean, one of the problems, or one of the concerns I've heard about, is population numbers, not really understanding how many badgers are actually out there, even though they have a quota, how many to kill.
Well, they've done a number of surveys. They've done hair trapping to get DNA to try and model the badger populations in the two cull trial areas. And I have to say their estimates range extremely widely. And if you are only allowed to cull 70% in the cull area, if you really don't know what 100% is, you could have local extinction.
Yes.
And I really don't believe that that's sensible.
No, that's right. About the other alternative then, how viable an alternative is vaccination then for badgers?
Well, the Somerset Badger Group, if I can talk locally now for Somerset, the Somerset Badger Group decided to set up its badger vaccination programme last year. And we wanted to do that. We're a group of trained lay vaccinators. I have a licence for Somerset to vaccinate badgers. And I have a group of very dedicated people who give up their time for free, so we don't charge for our time. And we set up primarily to offer farmers and landowners within the West Somerset Cull area in particular an alternative to culling. And we charge £25 per vaccinated badger.
Right.
And we have worked with 3 commercial farms and a number of landowners since we started up last year. And in particular, one very large farm chose to go down the route of badger vaccination because they genuinely believed, and they have cattle, it's a mixed farm, they have cattle, beef cattle and sheep, and they genuinely believed that culling badgers was going to really risk increasing TB for their cattle, and that they felt vaccination was the right way to go. And they did that, and it was a very brave thing for them to do.
Right.
And we would genuinely love more farmers to trust us. We do a very, very good job. We've had accolades from the Animal Health and Veterinary Laboratory Agency in terms of how effective we are at vaccinating badgers.
Yeah.
And we do genuinely offer an alternative for people.
Yeah. I mean, is it a big cost to vaccinate?
Well, the cost of the vaccine is £14.50.
Right.
The NFU have been saying that it costs £600 a badger from the Welsh vaccination trial.
Yeah.
The vaccination trial in Wales, I don't know how that £600 per badger has made up.
Right.
A significant element of that will be labour costs. It's possible that the cost of the kit, buying the traps and all the other things that you need to get, may have been factored in just for 1 year rather than depreciated over a 5-year period. But when you consider the cost of this cull to the taxpayer now,
Right.
they have spent over £1 million already on taxpayers' money, which primarily is things like licensing activity by Natural England and also set surveys.
Yeah.
Now that it's started, there are going to be significant costs. At least £1 million has been estimated for things like monitoring, for post-mortems, for the cost of the shooting, for I believe that DEFRA have been subsidising the weapons. So all those costs, and if you add into that also a £500,000 estimate for policing these culls each year, so £500,000 of police costs just for the West Somerset cull area each year for the next 4 years. It's actually cheaper to vaccinate the badgers in the cull area than it is to cull them.
Yeah. Now, of course, this money has to be found, doesn't it? So how do you go about funding such a project?
Well, we've been very, very fortunate. We work in collaboration with a number of other charities, Secret World, for example, the Badger Trust, Network for Animals, who have given us both resources in terms of volunteers, but also money for kit and things like that.
Yeah.
And also we've been very, very lucky. We've had donations given to us from members of the public. One person even managed to get a very, very well-renowned children's book illustrator to create a badger painting, and it was auctioned on a Just Giving website, and she managed to raise £1,200 for us. So it's done by very generous donations from other organisations and members of the public.
Yeah. How long does the vaccination last?
Well, it lasts for the lifetime of the badger.
Right.
But it is a 4-year programme.
Yeah.
So if you sign up to have your badgers vaccinated, then it's a 4-year programme. Not because the same badger has to be vaccinated for every year for 4 years.
Right.
But you want to get the new cubs the following year.
Yeah.
And so because the lifespan of an average badger is about 4 to 5 years, the turnover of badgers within a population is quite quick. So within a 4-year period, you can have vaccinated a very, very high percentage of the badgers in that population, and you get what's called herd immunity.
So the vaccination then doesn't go through to the cubs, then, does it?
No, it doesn't. So it's not passed on from mother to cub. But
Right.
recent research has proved that cubs that are born within vaccinated groups have an 80% less chance of contracting bovine TB. So it's a really major benefit.
Well, that's quite a high percentage, isn't it?
It is, yes.
I mean, in many respects, humans, we eradicated TB, at least in this country, through a vaccination programme.
We did.
And people were tested to see if they already had some form of immunity, because obviously TB was rampant in earlier days and whatever. And my mother caught TB when she was young, and I think she passed her immunity on to me. I think but I think one needs to understand that a vaccinated badger, even if they're affected, I know some people are saying, right, well, you can still have an infected badger. But I understand the science of this is that a vaccinated badger that has TB, the vaccination goes to the kidneys, which actually suppresses the excretion of TB bacilla. So even a badger that has been vaccinated is less prone to peeing out the bacilla.
Yeah, it is true that if you vaccinate a badger that's already infected, now that doesn't mean to say it's infectious, but it's actually come into contact with TB, that should it become a more full-blown disease, it does slow down the progression of that disease, and it slows down the excretion of the bacilla, which is absolutely right. So there are still benefits, even if you have vaccinated an infected badger. But one point that I'd like to try and stress, which I don't think comes out sufficiently for people, is that we're talking about a very, very small percentage of badgers ever becoming infectious.
Yeah.
So even if they contract TB, they don't live long enough, a lot of them, to ever get to the stage of actually becoming infectious. And it isn't until they become infectious that they're then a risk for cattle.
Yeah. So what's been done then so far to try to get the government to change their mind about culling?
Well, a huge amount. But
yes, I can imagine.
Unfortunately, we haven't managed to do that. But, for example, the government e-petition was set up. There have been a number of debates in Parliament. The first one was a success, the second one less so.
Right.
But nevertheless, there is a growing public concern about it. People are really concerned that this is happening without any real benefit for the farmers and their cattle.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if people genuinely believed it was going to have an effect, and even if and even myself, if I genuinely believed it was going to make a major contribution, I'd be very hard-pressed to argue against it, because I genuinely feel for farmers who have to be closed down because of it.
Yeah, yeah. So the start of the cull then doesn't bring your efforts to an end, though, does it?
No, it doesn't. I mean, we will always keep the door open for negotiation and for trying to influence. We will always be trying to give people the scientific, up-to-date information. We try not to go down the route of confrontation or being emotive.
Yeah.
And our primary aim as a Badger Group has always been to try and, give people the best possible solutions in giving them the best possible facts and trying to solve the solution in a much more appropriate way.
I mean, how hopeful are you that there could be a difference could be made here with keep petitioning and keep trying these different avenues?
I honestly don't know whether this government really wants to listen.
Right.
They haven't listened to the scientists. They're not listening to a very large member of the public. I don't know why they're hell-bent on doing these culls with such a limited return. They've said in the past that TB keeps going up, but in fact the incidence of TB has been coming down since they introduced more specific measures for biosecurity and better cattle movement controls. But one of the things they really do need to do is to try and get the testing regime more accurate, because there's nothing more upsetting for farmers to get reactors, and when they go to the abattoir, find that there are no lesions or any signs of TB. And, and also you've got the other problem where potentially they could be missing an animal that has got TB that is left to infect the rest of the herd. Yeah,
because badgers do roam, don't they? So
they do range within a territory, yes.
Yeah, so they could, as you said earlier, could in effect be spreading the disease.
There is a potential. I mean, nobody denies that badgers are not implicated, but the level of implication is the one that people disagree about.
Yeah.
But they, scientifically proved that badgers, there's a very, very, very small percentage of badgers that are actually at a risk to cattle.
Yeah.
And the government themselves says, well, we'll only solve 16% of new incidents by culling badgers, so you've still got 84% of the problem to fix.
Yeah. Let's talk. Sorry, carry on.
I mean, one way we would really like to try and influence, and I would really, and I've spoken to a number of farmers, and many of them say if we could have a cattle vaccine now, we would grasp it with both hands.
Yes,
even the NFU are saying that. We have got a cattle vaccine. We have got a differentiation test, which is called a DIVA test, and that's a test that can differentiate between an animal that has been naturally infected with TB and one that's been vaccinated. Because at the moment, the current test which show a vaccinated animal as testing positive. So that test does exist.
Yeah.
The government have always said that the European Commission won't accept vaccinated animals into Europe or their products. The European Commission have said that they are willing to accept that, provided this government goes down the route of doing proper trials on the cattle vaccine and the DIVA test in this country.
Right.
Now, trials have been done abroad, but they're not prepared to accept that data.
Right.
The government now needs to go down the route of getting those trials up and running in this country now, so that the 10-year timeline that they keep telling farmers, which they've been telling farmers for the last 20 years, actually becomes a reality, and hopefully even less than that.
Yeah.
But they just don't seem to want to commit to go down that route.
Right.
And I think farmers and everyone else in this country believe that, as your friend said, I can't remember his name. Eddie. You know, that vaccination in this country worked for humans for TB. It does work for badgers.
Yes.
And it can and should work for cattle.
Yeah.
And that's that combined with proper biosecurity, good movement controls, accurate testing, would work.
Yeah. Could we maybe move on to the Somerset Badger Group for a bit?
Yeah.
A bit of cheery news.
Indeed.
Tell us how why it got set up in the first place, then, the Somerset Badger Group.
Well, the Badger Group was set up in 1989.
Right.
And it currently has over 60 members. And we work in partnership with the Somerset Wildlife Trust. And we also work very closely with Secret World Wildlife Rescue. And we were set up primarily to give advice to farmers and landowners, to police, the RSPCA, to the public on badger-related issues.
Okay.
And also we rescue, and we've set up a 24/7 helpline, which has been in place for some time. And we rescue injured and orphaned badgers. And we're there to promote their welfare and to protect badgers, their sets, and their habitats.
Right. So,
and also we set up the badger vaccination program.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just had an email in from one of our listeners, and they've heard this information through the local Women's Institute, and she'd heard that a farmer's wife who was concerned that if one of the badgers on her land, which do not have TB, was killed in a cull, that the land will be occupied and taken over by an infected badger moving on it. And this is something called perturbation, isn't it?
Perturbation effect, yes.
Yeah, because badgers are actually very social groups, aren't they? They've got a hierarchy, and if you sort of like kill, someone who's actually controlling that, you could kill the lead badger or whatever.
It does disrupt the whole social group. If you take dominant individuals out, then it's a bit like breaking up a family. The remaining animals have got a situation then where and badgers defend territories. And if you take a number of individuals out of a particular group that's defending a territory, you then have a situation where that territory potentially becomes more available to other badgers. Yeah. And yes, you do get migration and immigration naturally between social groups of badgers.
Because actually badgers can roam about 15 kilometres and whatever.
I've not heard that. I do know that from research at Woodchester Park, which has been going on since the 1970s on badgers and bovine TB, where they have extensively trapped and recorded badgers and how they interrelate with each other, and where and how far they roam foraging at night. I know a radio track badger at Woodchester Park roamed 1.5 kilometres foraging. I've never heard of a badger roaming 15 kilometres, but their territories tend to be a lot more discreet than that and a lot less, particularly in high-density areas. Yeah. But yes, the listener who emailed
It's
in,
right, yeah.
It is right that there is potential for that, yes.
So when you're not trying to champion for badgers, what does the Somerset Badger Group normally do?
Well, we are very, very, spend a lot of our time helping people, what I call helping people with badger problems and badgers with people problems.
Yeah.
So it can range from problems with badgers coming into people's gardens, and this year has been a particular issue because of the very, very long dry spell. And about 60% of the badger's diet is earthworms, and when you get very long dry spells, whether they're in the winter or in the summertime, worms go into what's called hibernation. It's estivation, and the badgers can't get to them. So suddenly 60% of their diet is no longer available. So they then have to look for other things, and they start digging up things like leather jackets and cockchafer larvae in people's gardens, which live under the turf. And of course, that's really distressing when you come down one morning and find half your lawn dug up.
Yeah.
But there are things that you can do, and so those are the sort of things we get contacts from police, for example, to look at set persecution and other things. We rescue orphan badgers. I can tell you a story that relates to a cub not a million miles from here, just the other side of Milverton, where somebody going to a club saw a badger, a small cub, in the morning sitting on its dead mother. And she'd been run over that night. And so I went to see if I could find this cub. And in fact, probably about 2 or 3 meters away, I found a major set complex in a small copse. Found out who the owner was, asked permission if we could set up a camera and whether we could put some food out to support feed this cub. So we set a camera up and we saw this cub on camera. We started support feeding this cub. A few days later, we found there was another cub. And a few days later after that, a slightly more extended family. And I'm very, very pleased to say that after 6 to 8 weeks of support feeding, both those cubs are doing really well.
Good.
And the cub that lost its mum has integrated into the rest of the family, so it has a really, really good chance of survival.
That's good. It's a lovely story.
So those are the sort of things that we are trying to do. We're trying to help people learn to sort of live with badgers, if you like.
Yeah.
And trying to do whatever we can to raise public awareness, to try and dispel some of the myths, if you like, and help where we can.
How can Somerset's badger lovers then get involved in this and help?
Well, you can certainly join the Somerset Badger Group. We have got a Facebook page. We've also got a Twitter page. You can also join peaceful protest if you want to. The Somerset Badger Patrol also has a Facebook page, which is a group of individual people from all over who are peaceful, act within the law, and it's a way of peaceful protesting. We also have a big event planned for Saturday week in Taunton, which is a bit like the London March. But the idea is that we try to get as many people as possible to go to Taunton between 11 and 3 next Saturday as a way of just peacefully protesting against the cull and trying to raise public awareness again.
Because you do surveys as well, don't you?
We do. We also do training days for people. We do training days for the police as well.
Right.
But we do training days. We also give talks and presentations. So if people would like to find out more about badgers or find out more about the Somerset Badger Group, then we can go along and do talks and give them all information.
Interesting, you mentioned badgers digging up lawns. When I lived in Holywell Lake, we had regular badgers in the garden, and they started to dig up the lawn because maybe there was a bank vole even in the ground, which probably didn't help. But we threw a handful of peanuts down every night, and they left the lawn alone completely, and that seemed to cure the problem.
It can. But but what you have to be careful is that you don't want to get the badgers dependent on your handouts.
Absolutely not.
Because if you start putting out too much food, you could have the situation where you might overinflate the population. And then if something happens to you and you no longer put peanuts out, those badgers are then, suddenly their food resource that they were relying on has gone. So you can put a little out, which helps. Too much can cause a problem.
There is a balance, and I think we got the balance because in the end, I think they got the vole.
Yeah,
I think they got the vole in the end. So but it was interesting. It's lovely to see them so close. I mean, they got really close. They got this earthy smell, and it was wonderful.
While we've been vaccinating, most of the landowners like to come and join us. And most of them have never been up close to a badger at all.
No.
And they're absolutely amazed at how non-aggressive they are and how easy they are to work with.
It is an experience. It is an experience. Well, that's it for this week, Vanessa.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, thanks to you for coming in, talking about badgers from the Somerset Badger Group.
Just one thing before I go.
Yes.
If anybody has got a problem, our helpline is a 24/7 helpline.
Okay.
And it can be found on the Badger Trust website or on our Facebook page.
Okay, right. Well, that's it then until next time. So this is LB Loxley saying cheerio. And we'll end with an instrumental piece from the album The Missing Gift, appropriately entitled The Badger.
Can I just say that obviously, you know, there are badgers that are going to not be shot cleanly and whatever, and could, you know, stray. And if someone is walking around the countryside and sees a badger, you really do need to get professional help, because badgers, even a stunned badger, is quite a dangerous animal. You know, they have very strong jaws, and you know, for doing what they do, which is, you know, eating prey, etc. And it's been known for badgers that have been knocked over just to be stunned, but still be quite alive. And so don't just approach a badger that you think, you know, by way of helping it, because you could get into serious problems.
You do need to handle them very carefully,
Yeah.
yes.